So this is video and podcasting case study assignment done for Intro to Digital Studies. This is my case studies by Jonathan Davis. So start out. Case number one, Howard Stern podcast serial killer. Now, it kind of wasn't a podcast, but it kind of was. It was his talk show on the radio, but it was the exact same setup as a podcast and kind of served the same purpose. So we're going to go with it because I looked for hours for some cases and just very bare, but this is the one that I really wanted to talk about. So I'm going to do the best I can do. The problem was one day on Howard Stern's podcast, he received a call, one that he would never forget. A man by the name of, he didn't know this at the time, but later on found out. It was Clay the serial killer. The caller had admitting to killing over 12 prostitutes. The murderer had been searched for years. Police later mentioned that they knew who it was, just based off the fact that some of the details only the killer could have known were mentioned on the show. He was later on caught. According to 97.3 The Dog, in an article titled "Louisiana Serial Killer Confesses to 12 Murders Live in Hollywood Stern Show." So something I'd like to add in there was, he admitted to killing 12 prostitutes, but he also admitted to wanting to kill more and saying that he doesn't even know why he does it. And he said he did his first killing at the age of 16 years old, which was kind of a crazy thing to hear. To think about someone being 16 years old and just saying, screw it, let's murder somebody. And they kind of just asked some questions on the show that, they were really good questions. They were kind of questions to help him incriminate himself. So shout out to Howard and his crew member on the show, but they did really good at making him incriminate himself. Solution. So the solution to this issue in particular was solved using caller identification, I believe. I looked everywhere. There was multiple things saying that's how they caught it. They later identified the man, called him, and sentenced him to life in prison without parole or probation, which is pretty hefty. People do a lot of crimes and don't get life and sentenced to life, especially not without parole or probation. The immediate results of this, people may not realize how big of a deal this is, but thanks to the show, it helped these families find closure for their lost ones. There's my citations. There's a picture of the show. And this is something I didn't write a lot because I knew I was going to have a lot to talk about on this one. So basically, I know from watching a lot of documentaries and just from losing close ones personally, when you lose somebody, sometimes the best thing you could ask for is closure, just to know that they were okay or what happened, because a lot of these people had been killed or missing or didn't know who did it, and just knowing who did it is a hefty bit of closure for many people. That's kind of what they would like to have, is just closure, just to know what happened, why, who did it, when, where, what was the purpose. That way they can get closure, but in a deeper meaning, get an idea of kind of again why, just what just occurred. Especially when it's your loved ones, you do want to know, what was the purpose? Was there a purpose served in their loss of life? And then obviously in this case it's not the case, but when it comes to a lot of situations where it's like a mystery, it's pretty difficult. And I've been through something like that personally, so it's definitely hard. Definitely not an easy thing to do. And I'm pretty sure the results of this would probably help a lot of families find a decent bit of closure. A lot of hate towards, a lot of animosity towards, obviously the Clay the serial killer or whatever, but I'm sure this tremendously helped these families find some closure. The next case I'm going to talk about is when Trump discusses the killing of a world leader. So there's this podcast of these YouTubers called Full Send Podcast. It's a really big podcast. I don't even know their number. I know they're in the tens to hundreds of millions of subscribers and followers. So that's one thing I do know. They are very, very well followed. I personally watch their podcast myself because it's extremely interesting to watch. They get people like Elon Musk, Trump, some people that just you really wouldn't expect. So it's a very interesting podcast. There's times where you're just like, what the heck? They'll bring on a rapper that talks gibberish for one day, and then the next day you'll have President-elect Donald Trump. So it's just kind of interesting. On the podcast, I put problem, but I just didn't really know how to say this. On the podcast, the Full Send podcast, Donald Trump came on the podcast and talked about crazy stuff that happened while he was the president. And he even mentioned how he ended up killing Qasem Soleimani. I tried to pronounce his name. I always mess it up. He happened to be a terrorist and caused a lot of harm to the world, especially at this time. Now, this really isn't a problem. This is just a case where something happened and it was talked about on a podcast. So that's kind of why I've included this one, because I looked for a lot of things, but this is one of the things that definitely stood out to me. It was just like something that happened and then was on a podcast. Obviously, that's how it goes, but this is like a major world event and then was discussed thoroughly on a podcast. So that was interesting. I mean, especially what it was. It was incredibly interesting. You don't hear a lot of the times about how that went down. I mean, Trump said it publicly a time or two in interviews or speeches, but it's still just something that's really crazy to hear. I looked for everything I could in this. The solution was maybe talking about how it happened on a podcast that is followed by millions. Was my answer to this one. Yeah, truthfully, this was a hard one to pick a solution for because, like I said previously, this is an event that wasn't, how do I say this? It wasn't great for some people. Like obviously, a bad guy needs to go, but like nobody wants to hear about somebody dying. It's just a sad thing, but it was just something that kind of brought a lot of peace to a lot of the world when this happened. And to hear, the strategy that was took by our president was definitely like, some people are patriotic, some aren't, but this is like, it's incredible to hear. He took some incredible strategies to this and made sure it happened the right way, which was, I mean, me personally, I really thought it was nice to hear that one of our leaders, especially our leader, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, the way he did it was just very manly and just very, like, he handled the job, which personally a lot of times I feel like the government doesn't do. So it was nice to hear our guy did that. The results led to a lot of clips online being posted and shared. Many Americans appreciated hearing the strategy that was took to handle the issue. From our former president, like I just said. Try to hold off. Yeah, it was just a lot of there was a lot of memes and stuff online about it, and just a lot of people were posting and being like, "Hell yeah, this is awesome. This is really cool." Yeah, I don't know. Those were two things that I found the most appealing when it came to podcasting. Most interesting when it came to studying anything. I'm praying to God that this was the way I was supposed to do it. I've watched videos on how to do case studies. I have read everything I could read. I'm just hoping this is the way I was supposed to do it. Yeah, that's all I got.